So I'm Robert Kelly. I'm a pastor here at Beacon, and my wife and I founded the church. So we've been here since before the beginning. That's over 20 years ago. Who is Jesus to me today? In some ways, he is the same Jesus that I met many, many, many years ago, back when I was probably a teenager. And in some ways, he's the same Jesus that I left for quite a few years, and then came back to in my later college years. But now I'm logging some miles. I'm getting older now. And he is still, he's still that same Jesus. He's the one who saved me. He's the one who loves me. He's the one that has called me into, this mission for my life. But but he's somehow closer. He's more of a friend now than he's ever been before. Yeah, I was raised in a nominally Catholic family. And so we would, I did my baptism and first Holy Communion. But it was really around the time of my first Holy Communion that my family was sort of reconsidering the church that we were a part of. I think one of the straws that broke the camel's back, it was actually during my first Holy Communion. And apparently, 7-year-old boys have a hard time sitting for hours on a wooden bench. Who knew? I mean, right? Who would know that? And so I got in trouble, and my mother did not like that at all. And so I think that was sort of the beginning of the end. Some of our other family had already moved to different types of Christian churches, and so my mother started looking, and sometime in the next few years, we started attending a Christian church. And so in that way, I feel like Christianity has always been a part of my life, even from back in my Catholic days, and then all through the whole variety of different kinds of Christian churches over the years. But there were a number of years where I really didn't walk with Jesus at all. It was definitely, my view of God was definitely skewed, for sure. Some days I wonder what parts of my view of God are skewed even today. But back in those early days, and really through much of my teenage years, my view of God was one where he was a very, very harsh God. He was very demanding, and largely a God that I couldn't live up to or meet his expectations. That it wasn't possible, and so it was a kind of a very heavy version of the Christian faith, and that really continued probably up through college at some point. I wish I had sometimes I wish I had one of those amazing testimonies where, like, you went and you did all of this craziness, and I did quite a bit of craziness, but that suddenly I had this incredible epiphany, and then I know the moment, the day, the hour, the minute that I became a follower of Jesus. But I don't. That's not my story. I wouldn't really be able to tell you within a 10-year period when I actually became a Christian. I was involved sometime around between 7 and like 10 and 11 is when we kind of got settled into a new church. And we were very involved. I was very involved in the children's ministry and then the youth group. I ended up becoming a youth group leader in some ways. We did trips to Newark where we would do street evangelism, and I was running a the ushers team at some point for the balcony. They wouldn't trust the young people with the main floor. That was too important. But the balcony, where a lot of the youth stayed, we could run our own show up there. And I had some good years where I felt like I was getting to know Jesus and where faith was really meaningful to me. I was baptized during those years at some point and had a really kind of a great collection of Christian friends, varying degrees of maturity. So I ended up starting to fall away from the faith toward the middle of my high school years. And they were pretty tumultuous years. You know, I've had a really good upbringing. I mean, my family life was very stable. I had a very kind and hardworking dad. I had a mother who thought I hung the moon. They were a great model in many ways. They stayed together until my mom died. It's a good childhood, and we were nominally involved in churches and then increasingly involved, and the whole family was. And so a lot of very good memories of those years. But then I started rebelling against the faith and against my parents more and more. I ended up being a Christian in name only, and even then not so much. By the time I hit college, I was in full-blown retreat from any sort of faith. I had stopped going to church a long time back, really in my junior, senior year of high school, so I hadn't really been back to church. My life had no marks of being a Christian. I was living any way I wanted to and doing whatever I wanted with whoever I wanted. And so by the time my first year of college came around, I had already had a very large number of regrets of choices I'd made and people that I'd hurt, decisions that I would regret, some for many, many, many years, some to this day. And so I had no real faith at that point, really almost hostile to faith. When I was back in church in my high school years, my relationship with Jesus was pretty good in some ways, but in other ways deeply flawed. I had it in my head that it was very difficult to make God happy. It's a little bit unusual because, my mother was an amazing woman. She loved me so much and thought I could do anything, and very indulgent with whatever I would really want to do or pursue, and kind of led me to believe that I could do most anything. I could accomplish anything. My daddy had this real hard, really serious work ethic, and that was great. But the combination of those things, and maybe even in school and the things that get rewarded, really sort of got me jumbled up with this idea that I had to work real hard, make a lot of money, live, that would sort of be my marker of success. The kind of cars you would drive and the kind of house you would buy and all of that. And I was really wrapped up in that and really pursuing it. And on top of that, it was hard for me to think about my value or my worth apart from what I was able to achieve. And so achievement for me became nearly everything. And that carried right over into my relationship when I started to walk with Jesus. It just felt like I had to achieve, I had to work real hard. And I never quite felt like I was living up to the expectations that God would have for me. I wasn't even living up to my own expectations. How would I be living up to God's expectations? And so my relationship with him became very transactional. He would love me if I was doing really good, and then when I would fail, he wouldn't love me so much in my own mind. And I think that drove a wedge in my relationship with God. That little lie, that false bit of theology, I think it really started driving a wedge. It was hard for me to keep going, feeling like I was always failing. I ended up in those days, it was kind of it was my end of my high school years and the beginning of my college years. I had really decided I didn't want anything more to do with Christianity. I still had a lot of knowledge. I had done a lot of reading and a lot of study, a lot of Bible studies, but I really sort of rejected the whole of the Christian faith. I had a big issue with the relationship between science and the Bible, and I had all sorts of questions about the morality problems that I thought I saw in the scriptures. And really, I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And I had already tried the God thing that was kind of in my head. And then around that same time, I met a girl, and she wanted to start going back to church. And I thought that was a terrible idea. I was like, this was freshman year of college, and I thought, that's not the kind of dating relationship I want. Back in church and all those rules, I'd rather it not look like that at all. I'd rather it look filled with a lot more of the bad decisions I'd made earlier on. And but she was determined. She wanted to go back to church. I didn't want the girl going to church without me. And so we would I started attending a little bit with her. And around the same time, a friend of mine, my roommate at the time, he became a Christian. And I was like the only pseudo-Christian he knew. We were out in Southern California at the time. I had been raised in New Jersey, but was in California going to school. I was studying architecture at the time because I was going to, have the big house on the hill, and I was going to design it myself and make tons of money, and all that was kind of my values. Anyway, this kid, he starts asking me all sorts of questions because I'm the only one who knows anything about Christianity in this whole sphere, this whole world. And between that guy asking me and my roommate asking me all those questions and this new girlfriend who would soon become my fiance and is my wife, I started going back to church. It was a different kind of a church. It was a church where every service, every worship service, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday nights, it was a Bible study. They weren't hungry about the money. I was super skeptical about churches and their use of money, and they're always asking for it and all that. And this guy didn't seem to have any problems with hard questions. He didn't seem to have any problem with taking the scriptures seriously. He almost assumed that they could hold up under the weight of scrutiny. And it was just a different attitude. You could ask questions, you could challenge, you could push back, and you could dig deep into the scriptures. And that was the beginning of a significant change for me. I started reading everything I could on apologetics, on science and faith. I read a lot of the older writers, especially in more of the philosophical areas. I loved C.S. Lewis, and I read some of the classics of apologetics that were out at the time, as well as really anything I could get my hands on. And I just started soaking up as much as possible. And in that process, started falling more and more in love with the scriptures. And then there was one book in particular. It was a book by John Piper, Desiring God. And it was sort of the final switch for me. It was a book that helped me understand that the whole of the Bible had always been one long story of God loving sinful and broken people. And that was neat. Because I knew I was. I knew I'd had lots of mistakes, tons of regrets. And the idea that I could be perfect, that I could be pleasing to him, I knew I couldn't be. I knew I deserved judgment, wrath for my sin. I knew I had left a ton of damage and wreckage and broken hearts and hurt lives in my past. And I knew that deserved judgment. And it was through reading C.S. Lewis and John Piper, the scriptures, and listening to these sermons, these Bible studies, just every week, 2-3 a week, that I came to see that actually God, He did judge my sin, but He judged it at the cross. Jesus paid that price. And I knew it before that, but this was somehow different. It all just sort of started to click. And then this idea that delighting in God was what I was made to do, that it was a storyline through the whole of the scriptures, that I could actually base the whole of my relationship on joy and delight rather than duty and obligation and responsibility and inevitable failures. And so seeing that I was loved in that way, it really just sort of, it lit a new fuse. And then my girlfriend, she became my fiance, eventually became my wife. I started having doubts about an architectural career, switched to business, finished up my undergrad in business. But at that time, we were now involved in this local church, and we were loving it. We were involved in this marriage ministry and hanging out with all of these like older couples that have been married 30, 40, 50 years, and we were brand new, newly engaged or married. And when we saw what the faith meant to them and how it had solidified their lives and their hopes and their dreams and their marriages. And we just really started loving being involved in the local church. And then, it seemed like I had an ability to explain God's word to people. And I started seeing that both people responded positively to it. It became a productive work, you might say, and very rewarding. So we started wondering what that meant for us. And at the time, the idea of being in ministry was not anything we'd really thought about. Mostly because I had known a lot of pastors over the years and I liked very few of them. And the idea that I would be on that track, it didn't really even compute or register at the time. But being involved in the local church, being involved somehow with God's people in that way, maybe being able to teach the Bible, that was starting to grow in us, and that was super exciting. And so we ended up thinking about going on for my undergraduate, was just finishing up, and thought about going on for some master's work in theology or Bible. We ended up going to a school in Chicago called Trinity, and where I pursued a Master's of Divinity is what it's called. It's just graduate school for Bible. And it was there that I met a whole lot of other pastors and future pastors. When I started wondering if maybe there was a role for me out there in pastor land. And so we graduated 3 years later, and I started sending resumes out. And we only wanted to go to New York or San Francisco. Those were our two choices. They seemed like we had family in both places, and they seemed like the kind of places that if you were going to go and tell people about Jesus, they both seemed like places that really needed it. And so we thought, it's the Midwest, Texas, Florida, that all seems well covered. But I wasn't so sure that the coasts were. And we thought, if we're going to do this, let's just do it for real. And so we came to New York. That was 27 years ago. And I've fallen in love with the people of New York. Have become New Yorkers now that we've lived so many years here. And I started as an associate pastor at a church up on the North Shore. Was there for about 7 years, and then increasingly felt this desire to see if we could start another congregation in the middle of the county. And that was over 20 years ago. So we started with a small group. There's me and my wife, and then there were two others. There's 4 of us. Then there were 8. Then there were 12, and we were meeting in our basement of our apartment. When we started the church. There's just a handful of us. And a little bit of it went back to my business background. When I was studying business, I was in marketing. And for a little while, Cheryl and I had done a small market research company. But then we get into ministry. And our first full-time pastoral gig was here in Long Island. And I was at an ecumenical meeting. So there were clergy from all different types of faiths. There were Catholics and Protestants from every stripe, and there was a rabbi or two. And one of the common themes was that the faith is no longer important to people, that the people have left the faith. And it didn't matter what the denomination was or what the religion was. They all felt the same way. And they all blamed the people. And I just found this super odd. It never quite sat with me well, and I couldn't quite figure it out for a while. And then I realized it sounded like in business terminology, if you created a product, let's call it a widget, and you created a widget, and nobody was buying your widget, and you think it's a great widget. Everyone needs this widget, but nobody's buying it. What kind of a business person would blame the customer? It didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, here we are. We've got the absolute most wonderful product in the world. Salvation by faith alone through Jesus. Like you couldn't imagine a better product. If people aren't interested in it, it seems to me like the problem is with the retail outlets, not the product. If your widget, nobody wants it, and it's an amazing widget, then it sounds like it's being poorly represented. And so this really got into our heads and started kind of taking up residence inside our hearts in a little bit. And we really wanted to create a church that we would want to go to. And it wasn't much more complex than that. When we started, we had no resources, we had no real plan, we had very little experience. And so for many, many, many weeks, months, and even years, we wondered if we would make it as a church, as a congregation. There were many times where we would make these colossal mistakes and we would say, how are we still open? And that became one of our jokes around Beacon. How are we still open? What clowns are running this thing? You know, we would joke like that. But I think the bigger challenges are the ones that are happening internally. And one of the big areas for me that I think it was really sort of rooted in those early days of faith, and I would say I'm still wrestling with. It would be the whole sense of achievement. My dad worked hard, and he put in long hours, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 days a week. He would work all day, he'd come home, he'd have dinner, he'd work all night. He worked harder than maybe anyone I'd ever seen. My mother felt like I had hung the moon and that I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. And she really instilled that in me. And in some ways, that seems like a fantastic recipe for success in life, and it is. It also comes with a dark side. And so for me, a lot of my identity got wrapped up in my ability to achieve. A lot of the struggles I had in the early days of my faith, it was because I didn't feel like I was achieving enough to make God happy. And I had these great breakthroughs that eventually helped me sort of purify those little lies in my theology. But these things die very slow, painful deaths. And I'd say I continue to wrestle with this challenge. How much is my own internal desire and longing and drive for achievement, how much of my sense of failure is being driven by values that aren't rooted in God's truth or in the kingdom. And I feel like it's a gift that God has given to me, this desire, this longing to push and to press and to work hard. And I think He's used it to help establish Beacon and impact thousands of people. I think it always comes with a risk, a dark side. And so on a personal front, I would say that's a continual challenge for me, to keep an eye, a finger on the pulse of my own soul, to make sure that I'm doing what God is calling me to do. No less, no more. My grandfather, he was nominally Catholic. He just couldn't understand it. If you're going to be going to the ministry, if you're going to be a man of the cloth, that was his language, then you should be in the Catholic Church. And at the time, I was already with my fiance and soon-to-be wife, Cheryl. And I was like, Grandpa, do you see her? Like, I could never be in the Catholic Church. Like, not as a priest, because look, I'm going to get married. But of course, for him, none of this made sense. It wasn't a value that he had. My mother, very excited. She thought this was amazing. She thought it was great, because that's also who she was with me. Always encouraging and very excited about what I was excited about, and you can do this and all of that. My dad at first was very disappointed, and I could see it. He tried not to show it, but the idea that I would not be in business, that I would not be in architecture, that I would not be pursuing some career that would make me financially well off, that was a big deal for him. He had worked really, really hard to, put food on the table and to bring his whole family up in the socioeconomic ladder, and he had done it. He had moved from a tiny little starter house in a not so nice area of town to a really nice house in a much nicer town. He had worked hard, and he sort of expected that he had given me a platform from which to succeed by the world standards. And so he hadn't gone to college right away. He had gone back to night school because college wasn't accessible to him from his family's upbringing. My grandfather went through second grade before he left to go work and so, pay for food for his family, I think during the Depression or something like that. And so now I went to college and even graduate school. But for what? So I could, in his mind, struggle financially and without any real certainty about my future, about what I'd be able to provide for my own kids and all of that. So that hurt. That was a tough patch. That all shifted. My whole family isn't a family of Christ followers, and so my mom and my dad were, and so my hope and expectation was that they would be the ones to really encourage and support us in this thing, and my mother was. My dad wasn't. But I could tell he wanted to be. And I think that mattered. I think his concern came from a place of having struggled real hard and not being able to provide for his family. And he thought I was going to go back there. He had made it to a certain level. Why would I go back? That's changed over the years. And now my dad, even to this day, he's, I think, 86. And even to this day, writes me notes for my birthday. I'm so proud of you. And so great, like what you guys did, and love the church that you created. And he's more serious about his faith now as well. And so, yeah, I think that's been a pretty it's been a very redemptive part of the relationship, but definitely didn't feel like I was coming from a family that was super excited about it. The other issue is my family knew who I was in those years. So the idea that I would be getting into ministry seemed extremely hypocritical to them. I had been in some ways burned by a whole variety of different churches. By the time I was leaving the faith, I know there were a lot of personal reasons and personal sort of rebellions and insecurities that caused that. But there were also a lot of reasons from the church side. The church I had been a part of for a while was very money hungry. There was a time of waving of the checkbook and, let's show Jesus how much we love him kind of garbage. And I really grew to hate that. And I just thought this is the way it is in churches. I thought there was a lot of hypocrisy. I saw a lot of hypocrisy, not just in myself, but in a lot of so-called super Christians. Like they were supposed to be some of the best in the churches that we had been a part of over the years. And I'm not saying everybody needs to. The church is going to be filled with broken people. That's one of its great beauties. But there are a lot of good reasons people have moved away from church. And so now that sort of breaks my heart because I know it's a reality. And as a community, I want to represent who Jesus is and who he is to me and who he can be to you and to everyone else. And so I think it is the church's responsibility to be sincere and authentic and transparent, to be quick to forgive and also quick to repent. And I don't know that churches are always so good at this. And I know all of us are a work in progress, but for people who've been burned by the church, I would say, let's give it another shot. Try it again. I'd spent quite a few years as a skeptic and a cynic, really nearly an atheist, maybe an agnostic. And it took me a long time to realize there's a lot of great answers out there. And sometimes when we think we've already examined and explored all of those answers, maybe we haven't really done it in the way that we think we did. Maybe our memory of that searching and questioning is a little fuzzier than we'd like to admit. I would say give it another try. I would always, and I do always, encourage folks to come on back, try it again, have real conversations. Beacon has always been and will always be the kind of place where you come as you are. You come with all of your struggles. You come with all of your anger. You come with all of your challenges and questions. You come with all of your brokenness. You come with all of the pain that you have created in the world, and you come with all of the pain that has been inflicted on you by the world. And you'll find a group of people who are in the exact same place pursuing Jesus together. And you will find hope and you will find healing. I spent quite a few years drifting away from God, drifting away from faith, but I spent a couple years in full-blown rebellion, like full-blown retreat. I was doing anything I wanted in any way with whoever I wanted to, and I just found it increasingly bankrupt. I found every relationship I pursued, I found more loneliness in it. Every time I hit a new achievement, I got the thing I wanted to do. I finished that thing I wanted to finish. I won that award I wanted to win. I did not find it satisfying. And this was repeated countless times. And so I think by the time I met Cheryl and my friends started asking me questions, I had really felt like I had tried Christianity and it had failed me. But for whatever reason, it was just enough with him questioning and with Cheryl going back to church and hearing these guys with a whole different way of understanding the Bible and teaching the Bible. I went to churches that were the Calvary chapels. And so if you've seen the Jesus Revolution, it was those guys. And they just kept studying the Bible. And I really did just fall in love with it. I thought, this book is way smarter than I had ever realized. It's got way more insight into the human condition. It's offering real answers, and it's also asking the right questions. And I was just so drawn to it. When Cheryl and I got started, we were much younger, 20 years younger, 22, when we first started really thinking and praying about it, because we prayed about it and planned about it for over a year. We were super excited. We were just raring to go, ready to take the island by storm. And, every obstacle was just one more mountain to climb and take that ground for Jesus. And ton of challenges, ton of obstacles. We had 3 kids at the time. They were 5 and under. And so we had our hands full. I was working full time. I left a church position and I was working full time for a friend at a warehouse over in Hicksville. And I was driving a box truck up and down the eastern seaboard, making deliveries of like high-tech stuff, but mostly working in his warehouse and starting the church. All of this was going on at the same time with these 3 little kids. We were so excited and we were like, this is amazing. Nothing's going to get in our way. God's behind us. He's in front of us. Like, we're just so excited. And God just continued to bless. People started coming and the church started growing and we started seeing lives like genuinely changed and marriages get put back together. And we had all of these great stories going on. Fast forward all these years and the church has been through crazy years. I mean, we have done more and seen more and changed more than maybe any congregation I have personally ever known or been experienced with. And so now we're entering this new chapter, right? So now we're embarking on leaving this rented space, renovating a much bigger building that's in significant need of work, and to be in another community. We're going to be in the New Hyde Park community now, and we're going to be reaching that community in a new way. And we have this massive project ahead of us. I mean, bigger than anything we have ever done. And so I asked Cheryl one day, I said, listen, babe, I just need to ask. This is before we even went public, that the building was for sale or that we were going to try to put a bid on it or anything like that. We didn't know any of that yet. We just knew that it was going to be on the market soon. And so I just sat down and I said, babe, I just got to ask, like, we're much older now. I said, do you really feel like we've got one more big push in us? And she goes, one more? And that started a conversation about how each of us feels about like ministry, about Beacon, about New York. And I came to realize more fully that my wife and I are as excited about this next chapter. We're as passionate about reaching New York, about building Beacon, about the relationships and the teams that we've been able to form and be a part of, and the family, the spiritual family that we've created. We are every bit as excited about it now as we were at the beginning. And we feel super blessed by that God's had us in this for the long haul, and that we've been able to now see the generations grow up at Beacon. Kids that that we dedicated, that were in Cheryl's first Holy Communion class when she was teaching it all those years ago, are getting married now. They're going to start having kids, and we're going to start dedicating their kids. And to look at the life of one spiritual family that way through history now has been a very, very rich part of this next chapter of the story for us.